So hello and welcome. This is DataMesh Book Club, and we are continuing on Chapter 4. Matt's going to graciously continue to lead the discussion, so I'm going to let you take it away.
Sounds good. So you should be able to see my screen now. And we'll just dive in. Again, the highlights. We're about halfway through. In this particular thing where we left off, she was really kind of getting into making sure that the DataMesh platform was as autonomous and self-help as possible. Didn't require a lot of hand-holding. She talks about what her views on that. But this was interesting. She wants to remove the need for the team to chase the data. And for the governance team to have to how to justify it and get access and the permissions and all that kind of stuff, because that's a lot of heavy lifting. And so she talks about how it should be based on an automated evaluation of the consumer. So one of my questions was how does that happen? We've talked in the past about role or column level security, role-based security. I don't know. You guys are probably far more expertise than I am in this in our current data lake and data warehouse scenarios. But is that a fairly standard way of doing permissions, or is it pretty well done on a case-by-case basis, depending on the data set or what's in there? Yeah. Do you see something like this being possible?
I'll go first. I guess like it depends. I think it depends on the organization. And their policies, right? Like from having like a mainly like a dividing line on like PII, non-PII, or whatever the specific classification is, right? And if it's that simple, I can kind of see that, you know, you could have relatively simple entitlement rules for like making those connections automatically if the data is also auto-classified. But I also in I guess maybe for hobby, but not, you know, professionally, I've implemented a bunch of entitlement management systems, and it's gnarly. So like I also like would say, you know, it can be very difficult depending on the rules of the organization and their policies, right? Like, you know, yeah. So I think it depends for sure.
We're not a warehouse data lake organization. We'd like to be someday. And what I see is on the actual, so we'll take our student information system, rich set, a lot of variety of users. Some users have access to just grades and transcripts like teachers and counselors. Some users have access to healthcare type data, other sensitive demographics, but that's all set on the application level. Well, then we generate all these reports, and whether they're Power BI, SSRS, it seemed like we apply the permissions yet again on the view, so on the report itself. So we're saying who has access to this report. We might use row level security to say we're going to design one report, but it filters based on who's accessing it. But there's that gulf in between. There's the data sets and everything else. It would be wonderful if we could say, hey, if you had access to the data in the platform, you've got access to the data when it hits the data set. And that's the magic connection that we don't have, and I would love to see. Of course, two completely different platforms, two completely different ways of handling permissions, and maybe that's what she gets to. But I see that as I would love my report authors just to create all the reports they want, and if you get access in the platform, you suddenly get access in the report. But
yeah.
Well, I think another piece of it is the need for metadata management and metadata cataloging, because and if you can do it, automated metadata cataloging. Now that's, I would say maybe 5% of organizations are organized enough to be able to pull off automated metadata cataloging. But even just metadata cataloging is this huge step towards what you just talked about, Matt. Because if you have each of your columns tracked to what it is, and then maybe even just something as simple as some tagging, that lets you do some really amazing stuff when it comes to applying those permissions across multiple systems. And that's where a lot of these integrated data governance systems really become powerful. And I'm seeing things like, I'm sure everybody's seen some of the announcements out of Microsoft, but so Fabric integration with Purview can enable that, but you still have to do the work. And I think the part that's hard is that work is still ERP implementation level effort.
Mhm.
Wow.
Yeah, it's kind of what I was thinking of, entitlement systems are ERP level effort, right? And similar functionality, right? So work's still got to get done. Like it's difficult.
Yeah.
Something to add from some client work I did, and I mentioned this in a previous discussion, but it's relevant here, is cloud vendors are starting to create services, and I used the Google Cloud version, which is data loss prevention. And what these are is they're scanning services. And just again, I'm going to go ahead and share for a minute just to show you guys, because again, I always like to have the, like, how do we actually do this real world thing, right? So if you guys can see here, Cloud DLP in GCP uses info types. And this is a similar paradigm across all vendors. And they have these services now, which they charge for. So to Jason's point of metadata, automated metadata management, this isn't 100%, but the data mesh architectures are starting to include these services, which again, I'm not, like a cloud shill here. You're paying for this, so you have to make it work for you. So what you get is a set of info types, and you can see here the default info types, which are basically just configurable. I think it's either XML or JSON files, and it will either one time or, for our scenario, on a regular basis, scan your data and then take actions based on what it finds. Those actions can include tagging, it can include, notification. And notice they have high sensitivity info type detectors. And this is mostly around financial as a default. But again, notice you can do custom info types, and that's where I think the rubber hits the road here. That, like for Matt's case for school, they would have to create custom info types. So it's kind of a blending of what Jason said and what Matt said. But what I am seeing is that the cloud vendors are starting to provide these services. And I have used them with some of my customers, which does kind of bring this scenario closer to the possible.
Yeah, I've used these as well. There's a nice Microsoft Labs open sourced a nice one called Presidio that you can just take and run. It's a Python script. It's pretty powerful. And the nice thing about these, and I believe the Google one does as well, is they can also scan. It's not just at the column level, but they can scan the individual cells of data. And when you're looking at like a paragraph of data that might be, so looking at like medical records transcription, the doctor forgets to not say the patient's name while dictating their notes. They can scan and actually redact that information.
Yep. Yep. I've actually used that. So a use case is for medical research. It's super, because again, all this stuff we did it before manually with scripts, and these now become services that handle more of the edge cases. One of the things that happened in my town where I live, it's relevant to Matt's domain, more and more in schools. Schools are often target of cyber criminals. We had a very infamous attack in the Minneapolis public schools here recently, where the cyber criminals extorted MSP schools, and they went after the most, some of the most potentially damaging data, security data for the school. And so again, applying a layer of protection to certain types of data as we have more data, because, I don't know how it is in your school district, Matt, but in this particular school district, they have cameras, they have, kind of like response plans to different incidents. They have, it's almost like military in response, which is a whole another topic, right? But it's data that should be, very much protected, right? And because these data are new in domains like schools, I think this is a particular area of interest for you, Matt, because like some domains like fintech and health, yeah, okay, we know we have to protect that data for 100 years, right? But in schools isn't the only one. I mean, even things like, that we've heard about the baby cams, right? The webcams that you could go to Shodan.io and see in people's kids because of all the insecure IoT devices, right? So as we get more and more data in all aspects of our world, this need to segment and to auto-classify and to permission as a group, I think becomes more and more important. And I think that's what she's going for here. That's the way I see it. So,
Yeah.
So although the some of these things seem somewhat reactive, maybe like loss detection means the data is already published, you can kind of envision like a system where the data kind of publishes soaks and then is released after classifications are applied, right? So it could it kind of gets you there for sure.
I think with GDPR and stuff too, because a lot of companies, they want to retain all that rich data because they can use it for algorithms and refining their product. But the instant you say, no, I'm out, you got to delete my account, by law, they have to go and redact all that. I mean, you can anonymize it so you can use it, but you got to remove that personal information. Well, most people are just thinking, well, the database, the records. No, what about your backups? What about your logs? All that kind of stuff. And especially this day and age when you've got metrics and logs on every single little thing, where did they click? What were their eyes looking at? All that kind of stuff. There are, terabytes and more petabytes of logs where you may have to go through and redact someone's user, email address or something. So.
Yeah.
And that's exactly why we use DLP in the scenario with the client, because it was a legacy application that was microservices. And that's exactly what we found, because they said the database will be fine. We've de-identified, and it was, but the logs were not fine, right? Yeah, there's some experience talking, and the backups were not fine. And using that tool was a good time value proposition, because you just point the tool and I think like 3 or 4 times, you won't find anything else. Well, let's just scan it one more time.
That's funny.
Yeah.
Okay, moving on. Share my screen here. So then she gets into exchanging value, basically, again, making this autonomous. So exchanging value in between products. I like how she says the success by any system is measured, by any data system is measured directly by how much the data is exchanged. I thought that was an interesting metric. If no one's using the product to exchange data, then you've got a really expensive platform that no one's taking advantage of. So along with that, I'm moving my screens here. So she basically says the mesh becomes the data marketplace. Yeah, that makes sense. And then she goes through basically creating relationships and doing it in such a way that it's a standard, makes it seamless. You have to identify the data, you have to address it and all that kind of stuff. And I don't know if there's tools already out there that do this. She's made mention before several times, and we'll do it again, that vendors love creating highly complex tools. They're very integrated, but they're as long as you're within that one company's platform, it works well, it works great. But the idea of sharing data with a standard outside is very difficult. I don't know how they would do this. I've seen all these great mappings, on what is an ID on one versus another. I was trying to think of metaphors for this. Blender is interesting if it's an open source 3D modeling tool that's used for a lot of things, but they have these things called geometry nodes where you can do just spectacular effects, but it's all based on a flow. It's instead of hand coding and doing all these crazy things, and you map various effects to each other, but there's inputs and there are outputs. And so you can do it now through a UI, and you wire it all up. And I thought, well, is that what we're talking about? If we have a standard set of outputs, am I somehow wiring up my data so I can pull an input from a source and output and somehow wire that ETL in between? I don't know. I'm not sure how to solve this problem. So anyway, she again says, well, how do we do this? There's that cognitive load again. How do we make this autonomous to the general user? I love how she says, I should be able to express what my wishes are without having to describe exactly how. And so this is kind of getting back into that, cloud is starting to talk like this, right? How can I spin up 1,000 services? I need to be able to state what I want the end state to be. I want lag to be less than a certain number of milliseconds. I want to be able to address this sort of response within a certain amount of time and let it spin up and spin down for me to accomplish what the state I want it to be, and rather than me having to learn how to do all that behind the scenes and create complex scripts that spin up pools and everything else. So she's talking about this. She also says, declarative models can get very complex and hit limitations very quickly. But this is where she says, well, again, there's some really complex systems out there where we can state what the target state should be, and the system can do it itself. How this relates to data, again, I think it's easy to make performance targets. But when you're talking about exchanging data and getting two completely separate systems who have APIs, getting them to talk in some sort of standard way, I'm not sure how to do that. So I'm hoping that some of or she comes up with some solutions later on.
Yeah, one thing that resonates is what we were doing in my last company, which wholly resonated with this whole concept. So we had an event-driven model. We exchanged data through events, and we ended up with this consumer problem that okay, great, there's events and there's a contract, the data model is published, but I want to stick that in a table, right? Or, I want an easy way to consume that thing. So you get into this area of there's a certain amount of cognitive load. Okay, now we have this feed of data. We have this file on S3, let's say it's maybe not events, but how do I get that in a form that I can do the work that I need to do or get access to it, right? Let me be able to access that file on an S3 in Snowflake or Redshift or whatever I want. The latter, I think, is getting a little bit easier. Events, I think, are still hard. We tried building some custom tooling to make that easier on consumers. But yeah, I think some of this exists, especially for stateful data. I want this data to look like a table, and magically in most cloud providers that happens, right?
So again, I'm going to share, and I'm going to show you, because in my world of genomics, because it's so difficult to share across, there are a number of efforts, and this is a group that I've worked with in the past. They're called the Broad Institute at MIT and Harvard, and this is what's called Community Terra. So it's a website, and the idea is that it will abstract both data and computation. So it's a data mesh kind of idea for genomics that's domain specific. So once you log in, what you can see is they have a data catalog. So that's kind of the first thing to think about. This is a domain specific data catalog. And, I've seen this before in financial institutions and some other institutions, but just because I happen to work with this quite a lot, this is, to me, not yet pervasive. So you have to kind of start with the domain-specific catalog. And then going beyond that, then you want to put the compute in a format that is, again, domain-specific and associate the data. So this gets, this is sort of like an example of a data meshy kind of application. And you can see this happens to be associated with Google Cloud, and it goes all the way down to the level of a bucket, right? But the idea is that you will work with the data and the compute in this domain-specific interface, kind of like Elliot was talking about. But this just happens to be one that I've done quite a lot of work with. And when you go into the level of the data, what's interesting about this is they have actually made it very data meshy, in that this is the data for this particular analysis, we'll call it. And then here are possible tools that you could then just, this is a viewer tool for genomics, and this is a processor. It doesn't really matter. But the idea is as a domain user, the data is sort of central, and you want to work in this custom interface, which happens to be running in this case on Google Cloud. It can run on other clouds. And you don't really see that. You see the data first, and then you see the associated tools. Now, this particular file won't work with this tool, so it's kind of a bad demo, but kind of get the idea. This Power BI is in some ways kind of like this in Microsoft. Jason might have more to say about this than I can, but this one is just one that I have spent quite a lot of time with, so I thought I would mention it here.
Marcia, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just thinking about the applications which you were just showing, Glenn. They're associated with that certain PAM. So do we configure it somewhere, integrate it, and then the suggestion comes up? What is most suitable to this kind of set? How do we choose it?
Yeah, it's starting to. Initially, they just made the interface so that here's your data, here's your computation. But now in that interface and some other ones that are for genomics as well, they're even using machine learning to help, like you did these analyses in the past, and you could use cloud elasticity in add GPUs, add more CPUs, add more RAM to impact this workload. Because the configuration, as we all know, right, becomes more and more and more complex as you use more types of compute on your data. And
so it's more of AI. So it's keeping our history back there, what and when it was used, what kind of analysis we are trying to perform, and then it suggests.
Yeah, and in the case of Terra, it's an interface on buckets. So it's an interface on a data lake. But again, you couldn't even tell looking at it, right? And that's kind of the point, right? It's presented very much as a product, as a genomic data set, right? And I think that, again, computational challenges drive change. And as I've said throughout our discussions, the volume problem. You can't just put things in buckets. You can't keep it straight, right? So you need to have these interface layers on top. And again, I've seen it in other domains, but it just happens to be something that I'm working with that I hadn't seen before. Before I came into this, it was, where's your SQL server, right? Write a SQL query, right? And so this to me is directional where we're all going.
Makes sense. Thank you.
Okay. Go back. So yeah, she brings up this problem, the lack of standards. It's hard to scale, and again, keeping it low level, autonomous, reduce that load, because otherwise none of this is going to work. It's just another swamp. So she again alludes to various places in industry where this has already been done. We've been managed to be able to build powerfully scaled systems through loose integration, small services. She identifies Linux and Unix and things like that. She says, for some reason, we've abandoned this philosophy when it comes to big data systems. That struck me. Abandoned almost sounds like negligence or intentional. I don't know about you guys, and again, you're far more experienced with this than I am. I don't feel so much that we abandoned it, because I don't know that we ever arrived in the first place. I think data is still in the 80s and 90s and pre-2000s of before we took some serious look at how to do this at scale. The whole lean software movement, agile, and all that kind of stuff, other kind of things. I don't think the data even has ever gotten there. And maybe it wasn't really necessary back when, we had enough on-prem compute and we didn't share data with anybody. It was all intellectual property. We kept it in-house, so there wasn't a big deal. Now with this massive amount of data that we're trying to get out and scale and use across the organization or even in between organizations, suddenly we're faced with this. I'm not sure. But that struck me. I don't know that we've abandoned it so much as we haven't even gotten there yet. So, so then she's like, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I think abandon is actually a really good word, but you have to look at it from a certain perspective. There's several groups of people in the data movement. There's the people who came to data from academic disciplines and statistics, and I would agree with you. They didn't abandon these ideas. But there's a group of people that came to data from software engineering, and they gleefully threw every single one of these ideas overboard as they joined the data engineering world. And it's really amazing to me to see someone professionally, someone who's, I know that if you get them talking about software engineering, they're a huge advocate of continuous integration, delivery, unit testing, and then all of a sudden they start talking about data integration, and you ask them about unit testing, and it's just gone out the window. And so I think abandoned is actually a good word if you're coming from like a Google environment, a big, like that kind of big software engineering environment, and all of a sudden you're dealing with data engineers that just gleefully use Python notebooks for everything without any way to test anything.
That's a good point. That is interesting. So it's the engineering who's abandoned the practices, not so much the data industry in itself.
Yeah.
Yes, so source of data may come in this term, but not exactly the data. When we talk about data, we cannot see it to be abandoned anyway. Sources, domains, these things do come in a different way when Jason talks about the software engineering or developers. So that's a stream which uses and then may not be concerned about it, but we do care for they use, and they are working on their own way, but we are managing, we are thinking of to use it, purposely and sensefully. So for us, probably the idea saying that abandoned doesn't fit in, but it again depends probably more of the work culture, but we are not at all concerned about the leaving it aside somewhere. We are still using it. We are very much concerned about the organizational structure. We are still concerned about the usage. That's what I think about it.
So I like, again, how she clarifies what success is. So she says, effective data mesh platform, you can measure it in how long it takes to dream up an idea and to it actually be tested. And I like that she's putting boundaries on what success is, and they're value-based. They're not metrics or a dashboard with indicators that we can look at. It is, when does this provide value? What is the shortest time frame you can get from ingestion of an idea to actual value? And I like that. So she starts to talk about actually how. It's the first time she's doing that. Some of this stuff, I don't know if she's expecting the vendor to do, or if she's expecting the engineers who are maintaining the platform to do. Probably both. Probably more heavy on the engineering side initially. She talks about designing the APIs and protocols first. That makes sense. And she gets into low-level stuff like post, get, delete. That's a starting point. But I like how she is centering on things like APIs. Yeah, Lynn, you said, where's your SQL server? It's like, that is so low level. I've got a SQL server, someone's got a graphs database, someone else has got something else. And then we've got, thousands and millions of documents that were scanned. So she's starting with some sort of standards for interoperability here. She does say, keep in mind that generalist, again, we're going to hit that. This is not for data scientists and data engineers. This is for the generalists who work in various departments. And she says we got to satisfy that spectrum of users while still at scale. So again, she really keeps hitting on this is why data mesh is different for her. She does laugh, a few years, overinvestment on technologies that are marketed at data solutions. So she talks about DevOps platforms and other platforms, things like CI/CD engines and stuff that have been retooled and remarketed as a data ops platform, when really in the end, we already had this tool. We had bought it for the developers. Why are we buying yet another tool that just has a different name on it? So I like how she's saying, invest in tools you already have. She talks about, starting with something you already have, something that's known, simple tools. Again, she talks about that down here. But before I miss that, I'm glad she talks about higher level APIs. Your generalists aren't going to be dealing with gets and puts and deletes. They're going to be looking at higher level API, like, you know, get me my consumers, or get me this, or update. They want a high level that gets a product or a record or some autonomous unit, rather than these low level API calls, and they got to wire everything together. So I'm glad she does talk about that. And then build experiences and not mechanisms. So yeah, we're getting back to we're keeping the value in mind. I find as engineers, we love to start doing, you know, whiteboards and UML diagrams, and we lose the focus on what the value was. And we build some really amazing stuff. And in the end, the person says, it's just too hard to use. It's like, oh, wait, we forgot about that point, didn't we? So yeah, she talks about buying or building the simplest tools. So I had a question, you know, do these tools currently exist? Is she implying that they're already here and we're just maybe need to rethink using them? Can the big data vendors get there? You know, can we trust the big three, or what we would call the traditional archaic vendors who sometimes are slow to rethink the paradigm and get there? Or is this kind of a new market for startups, you know, the small nimble companies who realize, oh no, we see the tool, we see, you know, we're not married to this legacy platform. Maybe they build it on top of the big three, but I'm not sure. I didn't know what you guys thought. Is this a nice little market that's starting to evolve for the small nimble companies who get it?
Well, I
There are
think this is,
tools. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
sorry, I think this is where we talk about Microsoft Fabric. So, you know, if you didn't take a look yet, you should, as much as you can, whether you're watching the presentations or trying it out. But obviously that's Microsoft's sort of approach to this. Google has Dataplex and Amazon has DataZone. And they are all subtly different approaches. So I think where you start is you have to see where the cloud vendors are at and see what's there. In addition to that, I've done quite a lot of work with these integrators. One example is Databricks, which is started as managed Apache Spark, but really started to be what I call the data kitchen sink, where they have the data lake, the data warehouse, the data this, the data fabric, the data and they can run on all the different clouds. So kind of like I was showing you Terra for bioinformatics, Databricks has tried to move into this analytics space and really been quite successful because there wasn't a lot of competition. Now the cloud vendors are coming out with their DataMesh products, and it will be interesting to see what these vendors that were out early, particularly Databricks, also Snowflake DB, what their impact is. I have noticed that Snowflake DB's valuation has taken a substantial hit since the announcement of Fabric, which was interesting to me. So I don't know if any of you, I guess particularly Jason, because I think you do a lot of work with Azure, have any thoughts on that?
I think you're exactly right. We were in an interesting period last year where Databricks saw an opening and they dived for it without remembering that they're still dependent on the big cloud vendors, and the big cloud vendors could see the opening just as much as they could. And so now you have really five platforms that do this same thing. Each of them does it in a different way with different strengths and weaknesses. Databricks offers an open source capability and an ability to go cross-platform that at the moment isn't matched. You can run Databricks anywhere. You can package Databricks up so that you can deploy it on. So from what I would call like a third, or in this case, fourth party integrator perspective, Databricks offers a lot of capability in that if your organization is using Azure, I can deploy Databricks and build my solution for you on top of it. I can do the same thing on GCP or even AWS. And if I decide to get really creative and I pull out just a few little things, mostly at this point, I'm completely blanking on the name of it. Mostly Delta Live tables and the new cataloging system that Databricks has. then I can deploy it anywhere on Spark, on-prem. It's a really powerful cross-platform tool. Then you have Data Fabric, or Microsoft Fabric, which is, again, going to the same place that Microsoft has gone so many other times. They're making this relatively easy for not just JP Morgan Chase to deploy, but your like Fabric is something that a small organization or an organization without a lot of internal data support can make effective use of. And I think that that's a different target than something like GCP or Amazon's approach. Then you have Snowflake, and Snowflake is taking the ultra high end. They're the nerd of nerds here. Their system is designed to have all of these capabilities plus everything else. But I think that their problem is that they don't integrate well, and they operate on their own cloud right now. So people are going to be a little bit nervous using it when there's so many other alternatives. I do think Snowflake offers an excellent service, though. It's just, is it enough better that I'm going to increase my vendor list?
Yeah, it's definitely, there's some first movers out there. And, you know, Varsha and Matt, you haven't really got into this space yet, but Databricks valuation is incredible. I mean, they're one of the most highly valued companies out there because they were first mover. Microsoft Fabric is really interesting because a lot of the Databricks customers were Azure, although Databricks originally went on AWS because they wanted more of a managed service experience. And Snowflake was actually started by ex-Microsoft people, Bob Muglia. So it's really interesting. It's just an interesting, it's kind of a wild west right now. So you got that, and then the reason I showed you Terra is you do have in certain domains, financial domain definitely, things like Terra for finance, right? So you can buy solutions, right, for medical or for finance that kind of look like Terra, that are domain specific. That will probably come for domains like schools because of the increasing amount of data and the risks. And that's where I think we're going here. I think that this is going to be very much an area for companies to have opportunities for startups to kind of fill this space. I think there's going to be people who are going to be overconfident and try and build their own tools, kind of like when Kubernetes first started, and not have a lot of success because this is not for noobs. To build your own layer of security across multiple data stores is not for noobs. And I'm old enough way back when to have tried to do federated security with SAML and some other those old technologies. And often I was called in when projects failed because people overestimated their abilities. Federated security is hard.
That's true. The moment interoperability is being established, obviously with lots of Titan security, I see it will ease out a lot better. Some technologies are offering their best scaling systems, but the premises is their own, like Snowflake. Databricks, another thing in analysis, they're offering their own open sources, but the plugin systems are little tough for them. So the moment these junctions are building up here, I'm sure the problems what we are facing, and then the actual concept of mesh will easily be established there. That's what I see out of sitting with lots of these sessions and then listening people and reading documents. So I understand this, and of course with lots of your talks and your experiences, like Jason, you, Matt, everybody, and we all have different other problems to solve in. We know the solutions, but that's confined to certain portion of technology. When it's like we see the solution in two different zones, but how to club in?
Yeah.
The moment,
sorry.
The moment it goes in, like we are able to connect it, and then moment to the federated systems are here. I'm sure we can do that. Of course, lots of security governance, which I see is the major area in whole setup. Data is looking into it now. And I'm sure the experience which you are holding with genomics, it is, I would say, the best for now, which is vast in data. And we can see the case study from here. Gradually, few of like now education system, like banking, all these are gradually moving towards that, where we have bulk of data, and it's so hard to, would be somewhere would be there would be a point where it's not easy to establish. So all such things would come up there, and all technologies are coming up. The term which is saying that CI/CD, and with smaller technologies, no doubt many solutions are already there. Sometimes names do create the confusion, and new terms do take over, and we just look forward. What's that? Probably we do not know. We know. Core people do know about it because you're already working with that. But the new things, when it comes, we are trying to establish a connection between what we are doing and what's new coming.
And that's sorry to interrupt, but that's a great segue, because if I had a crystal ball, my crystal ball would say the vendors who provide the most integrated support for advanced machine learning are going to lead. Because what has happened parallel, of course, to the emergence of data mesh is the explosion of large language models.
Yeah.
And the computational requirements and complexity to process data with large language models is going to drive people to cloud vendors.
Mm-hmm.
And the cloud vendors know that.
Oh, yeah.
And so, I mean, there's a reason that Google released the model garden at I/O 2 weeks ago, and they gave 52 models for Vertex AI.
Mm-hmm.
And the following week, Microsoft hit right back, right? So I love it when it's like a battlefield. But to me, we've got these two sort of things going on. We've got this federation, all these, services, indexing, metadata, all these things we've been talking about that are super important and very hard to do, foundational. But then, to Varsha's point exactly, what's new is the integrated analytic support, not just for traditional reporting, but advanced machine learning. Not just basic machine learning, advanced. And that's where everybody's kind of, because that's going to differentiate where you go in terms of which vendor.
Do you think Amazon is in a little bit of trouble because they don't have their own AI? Yeah.
I do.
Yeah.
See, I think we can name, today we are naming like Amazon. We have one which is not even, right now we don't see that in battle. Another 15 days, you will see something more promising coming up, and then Google and Microsoft is trying to fight. So for us, it's good, of course, because then they are pulling up lots of solutions for us, something very, very promising, maybe very close to it and ahead of something. So this would go on.
It's very volatile.
It is.
It's very volatile right now.
It is.
And one of the things that we can do is continue to educate ourselves as basically guides for our customers, whether our customers are tech people or end users. Because, I mean, even just the point of Google, 52 models. Which ones are good?
Yeah.
Which ones do you want to use, right?
Yeah,
Exactly. So, but we can't ignore it. It's a fundamental factor driving the adoption of data mesh.
Yeah. Recently, I have been to the Confluence meet. So they are now trying to establish and trying to project the data mesh architecture in their system. I couldn't understand much because when you're there, it's lots of things are there. So core architecture where we are interested in, it sometimes messes up because it's lots of marketing and many things involved.
Yeah.
And it's so hard to get things in just an hour. It's like a part of technology, and the rest all is marketing. So I'm just trying to pull up more details from them. Let's see if they say that they are integrating the data mesh. I would like to see what exactly are they doing. They have already sent in some links to just to explore more. Maybe next week when we are, or whenever next we are meeting, I should have something to
Great.
talk on. Yeah, let's see if they are saying this. What's new there?
One thing that impresses me that's just so fun. You're right. It's volatile. We've got people hitting the tennis ball back and forth on the court, right? But to me, it feels like the products are still fairly well baked. That when they release it, there is really something substantial to play with. Whereas if you had told me Google's going to come out with this and 2 weeks later Microsoft's going to have their thing, it's like, yeah, we've all seen that. They take some old design, reframe it, and throw it out there because it takes years, to develop a good solid system. But I mean, when Amazon, you got 100 different services in there and they were largely disconnected, you had to be a genius to connect them all. Now we've got something where it's like, oh, if you're already a customer, we've already got your buckets, we've already got this. Now we have 50 models you can play with. Go play with it. Click some buttons, right? To me, that's impressive because while it looks like they're trying to one-up each other in a very short time frame, the products still look fairly usable. There's something I can play with.
Yeah.
Which,
you know what, Lynn's one of the LinkedIn courses where she was talking about this. So, and it was true. Because she's saying there that market will not pick up anything which is most recently came in. It would, people will prefer only almost 2 versions before just to try something.
Yeah, it depends. Usually enterprises are more conservative, but the most adopted product in the history of technology is ChatGPT.
Yeah. Which came out publicly, 7 months ago now?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Something like that.
Right.
And I remember, Google Labs was a cool thing. Every time they released a new product, it was fun, but 6 months later it was abandoned. You couldn't really connect it with anything. It just took a while for some of these new products that you could actually do something. Again, the fact that they've been able to release things so quickly. I love seeing failed demos like everyone else. They're on stage, they click a button and it doesn't work. It's like, well, yeah, because they were rushing to push this.
That's true.
Yeah.
When you talk about any technology, you will find plenty of technology companies coming up saying this bootcamp, that seminar, webinar, this, that. And when you listen to them, they are basically talking to certain one point which everybody is revolving around. There is nothing new. Except just a few things, just like Jason was just mentioning that, something, a small thing which is making them different. That's all.
Yeah.
There is nothing much, because majorly what you need, basic need is, what we need today is just one big platform which is consistently helping me to grow, not the technology to grow. I want to make my work consistent. The way things are coming to me, I want to manage it well. That's what we need. Platform is already evolving. Every other day you are promising this is working good, this is working good. Fine, but how would I indulge in my work until I test it?
Mm-hmm.
And then it's not consistent, it's going away. I'm not going to use it.
Yeah. Is this quick I don't know what I say, release of high quality products, is this indicative of just the level of maturity we've reached as developers? Or is this indicative that the cloud platform has finally reached some sort of foundation that you can quickly build things on top of it because it's already interconnected, rather than a whole bunch of separate little tools that we're trying to wire up? I don't know, have we gotten to the place where Google and Microsoft can release products within weeks of each other? Obviously, it's not a 2-week product. They've been working on it for a while, but they are able to release. I mean, when's the last time we played with a Google or a Microsoft product that was released and, there were 3 drop downs and that was all the options I got? And they were saying, oh, we're working on this later, they'll release version 0.2 or 0.3. Or I don't know. It's just, I'm impressed by the quality of these systems that they're talking about.
Some people are scared. I don't know if any of you watched the testimony of the OpenAI guy at Congress, Sam.
I got a recap of it. Yeah.
Yeah, it was quite interesting. So I mean, there's a dark side potentially of this too, but I prefer to focus on what could be done well, and then to have sensible regulation. I think there's a really great, and I'll link it in the comments when I post this video. There's a really great TED Talk that I mentioned, I think, to you guys last week, from Salman Khan from Khan Academy, where he, because they're using Khanmigo, and they partnered with ChatGPT people, which is a in-app tutor that uses large language models. They've been kind of an early adopter of it. So he has a TED Talk where he's basically, his TLDR is, this technology is here. Everyone is going to use it. Everyone includes good and bad people. And I, Salman Khan, think more good people need to use this so that they can counteract the bad people. And to me, that seems like the most practical approach. I am not indifferent to the potential dangers. There are many to this. But I think there's also a tremendous potential upside. And so, how we can overlay this into DataMesh is, to me, like the most interesting problem space right now. Because the foundation of all large language models, like any models, is data. So
recently, a high schooler, he put in details what he wanted to do with emulations in ChatGPT, and he got a big list of what to do step by step, which was concerning for the whole county.
Well, what's interesting is, take a look at the work, and again, I'll link this, from Khan Academy, because they make the interactions available to parents and children and say that. So they're trying to build in an example of safety. And this is something that we're going to have to learn, right? Because it's a new model. But rather than just reacting, I really like this idea of being proactive and trying to go out and build systems. But we are going to have some things are going to go wrong. So we also need to have, it's like any sort of problem and response. Like up in the Midwest, every first Wednesday of the month, we have a tornado siren because we have tornadoes here, right? And we have that every Monday. We need to have that. We need to have the tornado siren for ChatGPT or large language models that just says, they're trying to build guns or something, whatever it is, right? So,
no, but I guess, you know what? Until somebody is doing this, we are not into alarming state. I'm fine with it. You know what? I mean, being positive, obviously, it's another way. Things are there for us, and we are trying to build. Being constructive is good. But if some destructive person is not there, we are not conscious. We are not, trying to put restrictions on it. We are not concerned about how safely we can use. So somebody has to do that.
Well, going all the way back to when I was showing the scanning for the data, right, in the beginning, I believe that there will be tools, there are, I think, already being developed that scan for inappropriate responses. I mean, I've been doing a lot of testing of BART and ChatGPT, and there already are boundaries. Like, for example, if you search, and I forget which one it is, and you try to say, who is this person? Where do they live? One of them will say, I'm a large language model. I don't answer that, that means that you have tripped a safety boundary. So those things are already starting to be put in, but what will evolve beyond that is data security, going back to the data topic, right? The output of the model, that is a product around, in a data mesh, what is the output of the large language model? So data security products, as we integrate machine learning, will evolve. Not just like, oh, there's a social security number in this row in the database. It will be the output of this machine learning model is a potential problem. So again, I just see sort of endless possibilities, but the meta thing for me is to not run away from it, to kind of go ahead into it and say, what do we see and what are we going to do?
No, for sure. What you say is true. I tried asking for a script to get more hits on ChatGPT. So straight away, I was just randomly thinking of something that if there could be some fake hits on any of the social media content or something, can I do that? So it says clearly it's the sensitive matter, and I cannot provide any script on it.
Yeah. Well,
That's
again, we are the people, just like we protect the data now, right?
Mhm.
Like Matt, this is, your world, right? You protect the students' data, right?
Yeah.
This is a big part of your job. So as these ways that we interact with the data evolve and become part of our meshes, then that job's going to evolve. That's why I always kind of laugh when people say, oh, my job's going to go away, right?
No.
I think there's going to be more technical jobs. They're going to be different technical jobs, but more technical jobs as we go along, because as more of the world is driven by compute and data, I don't think that it's going to be totally automated. There's going to be more new kinds of jobs around. The way I see it is it's the same way as using like physical tools, hammers and screwdrivers, right? That's what large language models are to me.
Yeah.
Just like you would, and if you evolve from a regular screwdriver to a power screwdriver to a industrial screwdriver, you go through training so you don't hurt yourself.
The only thing is ultimately someone has to use it. So user is still there, the one who would drive it. Drivers
Well,
have
and beyond
operated.
that, there's so many nuances, like you said. I mean, the large language models, the idea just blows my mind that we could have crafted language models for different spaces. So in going back to your hardware, yeah, start out with the screwdriver, right, and the hammer, but then you go to Home Depot or Lowe's, and when there's 300 different
Yes.
kinds of screwdrivers, it's like, no, this one is
Which
for
one would you
finding
choose?
woodwork.
Right,
This
right,
one is for
right.
automotive,
Right.
And so it's the same thing. The idea that we could craft language models for education or medical or financial, and then you
In
get
the
someone
beginning,
in there
it
with
was
that
vague.
expertise.
Yeah.
Your classic job may be no longer available, but you're the #1 expert in your industry space if you can learn how to do that against AI.
And then the data catalog, like I showed you from Terra, which right now just has the traditional data sets, right? The data catalog will have the models, because again, it's this data mesh is going to integrate I think the data meshes that are going to be innovative.
Yeah.
So anyway, so I have talked so much. Matt, do you have more things to share, or how are we doing on chapter 4? We almost got it wrapped up.
Actually, that was it. So she just caps us off. This is where we were. She caps us off. Start with a foundation, then harvest, evolve, just like everything else. Then she recaps. So we're on to chapter 5. Whoever wants to lead that.
Yeah, and that would be the question to kind of end out our session. Who would like, in 2 weeks, who would like to lead chapter 5? Any takers?
Just a moment. So are we meeting 15th?
It's not next week, the week after.
So yeah, it's falling on 15th of June. Maybe I can take that.
Thank you. I'm going to stop the recording.